But if I have a different opinion, I'll let you know. And if your opinion isn't a good one, I'll let you know.
Would you take Bo or Max Domi right now? When Jim Benning gets to the table and he sees JT Miller, I think that's what made him hit the gas.
You make those trades.
Look at what he's done being emerged into our lineup. It's night and day.
He's going to be our next Sammy Saddle, besides playing half a game a year.
So sick of people acting like he hasn't been that bad. Dude, he has been atrocious. And these mental gymnastics you have to go through to get to Colin mind space on this trade is just, to me, it's way too much. Mr. Horvat has been bad. He's our captain. This is such a stupid take, Colin.
All right, thank you for joining us. Another episode of the Hockey Hour, a special episode. I will be your host, Austin McGregor, and I'm joined by a very special guest. You may recognize him from the starting lineup on Sportsnet 650 or as the play-by-play commentator of the EA Sports NHL series, James Cybulski. James, thanks for joining me.
Austin, special guest, man. Are you sure I'm special?
Oh, special. This is the most special episode we got.
You're sucking up. I like that. I do the same thing when I have a guest on my show too.
I mean, this is my first hosting too, so it is very special. But no, just kidding.
Oh, okay. Well, where's the man? So like, I wasn't relevant enough for the regular host to actually do this.
Yeah, I mean, they're too busy, I guess, having jobs and things like that. I guess they get some slack.
This is the perks of being unemployed, right?
Hey, right on. Exactly. Well, let's just hop right into this. I guess, we focused a lot on the Canucks and we seem to harp on it a lot. So I don't really want to get too deep into that. But overall, we are in the Vancouver market. What are your thoughts right now about the Canucks organization?
It's incredibly frustrating, right? I feel like we're starting to see a little bit of a parallel to when the Canucks were on the decline in 2015. They cut bait on John Tortorella. You went with the new era with Linden, with Benning, Willie Desjardins, and they found a way to get into the playoffs. And there was almost that false sense of hope where they got into the playoffs and it was like, okay, retool, as opposed to rebuild, right? And so it created, I think, a false sense of optimism, maybe even internally. But this team had a very small window to really kind of go for it. And I think that was last year. And you look at where this team's at now, this team isn't built to win a Stanley Cup. And I think when you look at some of the moves that have been made, I would say that the Canucks just grossly underestimated the impact, I think, within the room of both Jacob Markstrom and Chris Tanev. And look, personally speaking, I didn't like the idea of wanting to commit 6 years to Jacob Markstrom. I didn't like the idea of committing 4 years to Chris Tanev either. I mean, Jacob Markstrom to me, I think was still a lot of question marks around a guy to commit that much term and dollar for a guy who'd really only done it for about a year and a half. Tanev, long injury history. I mean, going to term for those two guys. And you know what? In 2-3 years from now, you might be shaking your head already with those contracts, right? I understand the logic behind those, but the importance of those guys, I think based on what we've seen this year, cannot be understated. And this team has taken a huge step back as a result of those two voids. And you look at where those dollars were reallocated. Nate Schmidt, I don't think has been what had been advertised or what had been hoped, I think, in this market. I think people wanted to fall in love with him, and Nate Schmidt hasn't proven. I think he's gotten better, but it's been a real, I'd say, turbulent start for Nate Schmidt. Travis Hamonic has been a miss, I would say. I mean, dealing with health issues, and it just hasn't clicked. And Braden Holtby, man, I was a Braden Holtby fan. I liked that signing. I was optimistic about that signing. So, if I was running the Canucks, I'd be probably kicking my own ass for making that decision because, right now, almost halfway through the season, Braden Holtby's been a miss for the Vancouver Canucks. And I thought he might have found his game again here. Here's a guy who's got a proven track record, but, he is continuing to trend in the wrong direction. So, you look at those moves that have been made, the guys who've come in have been essentially inferior to the leadership core that they said goodbye to. And look at Tyler Toffoli. I mean, this team still has a major hole in the top six. I think you might say two holes in the top six because, Tanner Pearson and Niels Höglander are realistically third line guys, right? And you're expecting them to try to contribute offensively in the top six. And they haven't been bad players, but you just need more offense from your second line. And that's where the frustration with the Lotto line comes from, that there's such a reliance on that line to do everything offensively.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one thing that, us as fans, we, I'm the same way. I was more for passing on Tanev, passing on Markstrom, because I know the long-term play that these both could play
Yeah.
up to, and understanding that and having that bit of realization. But for us fans, I guess one thing we don't realize is what I like to call, or like I've phrased before, the manalytics, and those things that, like in the locker room, you're saying Tanev and Markstrom being taken out, you don't have that leadership group to replace them, and understanding that's where, hey, you know what, maybe you do take the bullet and keep at least one of them, and I totally understand. And I say to GM's job is, hindsight's 2020 on them. A coach's job you see every day. And that's why it's so easy to make these easy comparisons on free agency. But yeah, it's such a, we're in such an abyss of a situation where we don't really know which way to get out right now. We have no clear path, and it's tough.
And in fairness, like, look at this time a year ago, right? And it's easy to sit there and say, well, other teams have figured it out, or teams in different positions. But if you look at March of last year, the Canucks bring in Toffoli. You have the NHL and Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley basically saying publicly, the salary cap for next year is going to be anywhere between $84 and $88 million, right? So now you're looking at an increase of another $4 to $7 million for the Canucks to potentially spend, and they've typically been a cap spending team. So in that sort of mindset, you go, okay, well, you know what? You could probably afford to keep Tyler Toffoli in a regular circumstance. But between the Luongo recapture, which, hey, man, like, there's a lot to get mad at for Jim Benning. Like, that's $3 million that came out of nowhere that they just said, you know what? Here's a big poop emoji, that you got to deal with, right? Like, yeah. But think about what $3 million is for that team right now, right? Like, and look, you can look at, okay, Sven and Louis and all these other contracts, and Roussel and Beagle, Sutter, all of it, right? You can nitpick all of those, but man, like $3 million, like, how much of a difference would that be right now? Like, that's not there. Like, that's a deal from 11 years ago, 12 years ago when that contract was signed, right? And they're paying for it now. So, I mean, that's kind of, but when you factor in between $3 million on that and another, what's the other? I mean, again, potentially $4 to $7 million in a cap increase. You're talking about $10 million of currency. Like, if they have that $10 million to play with in a non-COVID world, like, what is that? Like, is Markstrom still here?
Yeah, we're having a whole different discussion, right? Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you this much: I'd say Tyler Toffoli is certainly here still.
Yeah.
And how much of a difference does that top six now look with Besser possibly back on the second line with Bo, and Toffoli playing alongside JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, right? Like, that's a different looking top six.
100%. And I guess kind of on track with that, do you think that realistically we are putting a little too much pressure on this season? I mean, one thing I've kind of thought about is we're not treating this like a lockout year. We're not treating this like a shortened season that we don't have opportunity for flexibility, and we're just happy we have hockey to watch. Like, we're treating this like this is the pressure cooker for whatever reason. Like, this last 8 months, we have to figure it out. And I'm just don't quite understand that. I don't see where a lot of us fans don't have that. I mean, I understand where we don't have patience. That's not our forte, but we don't have the patience to even just look at what this season is for what it is.
I think there's a lot of hot takes on social media, right? And it's, I think sometimes it can be just simply clickbait, or people just jumping in on the masses because it's low-hanging fruit. But I would also say this, that this goes back to the outset of our talk, right? Of this conversation, false hope. And did the bubble create a false hope in where this team is at? Like, they got within a game of the conference final, right? And it's, and when you say that, you go, man, they were one win away from getting to the Final Four last year. And so you go, man, they were right there. They were that close to, if you're in the Final Four, you're one of the 4 finalists chasing a Stanley Cup. But this is not the same team as last year. B, if you look at that series against Vegas, like that was one guy who propped that team up, right? Like it was Bubble Demko, and even that guy's kind of missing in action. He's been better, but I mean, Bubble Demko hasn't been around in 2021, and it's a different team. And how would the Canucks have fared in a conventional 7-game series with the Blues? Like there was a team that had been ripped through with COVID at the time. I don't know how engaged those guys were to be in the bubble as a veteran team. But nevertheless, they played those games, they won, they got hot, they got on a roll. But I think it is built up a sense of false narrative. But I think it's okay to have expectations. I think, Austin, in fairness, like this market is hungry for a fucking winner. Like
100%.
Like I get it, man. Like it's been 10 years, it'll be 10 years coming up in June since the 2011 Cup final. And that was such a stinging defeat. Like, man, it was crazy to see how many fans just kind of walked away from this team, just exhausted after that run, saying, man, it's like feeling like your significant other betrayed you, right? Like it just hurt, that loss. And then to go through the rebuild and as slow and as painful, and you finally have something to cling to for some hope that you saw last summer. I don't think anybody, here's the thing. It wasn't inconceivable for this team to take a step back, but taking a step back in the eyes of most people here in this market wasn't acceptable, right? Like, look at how long it took the Avs with that young core to finally be where they're at now. Like Nathan McKinnon was a 2013 first overall pick, right? And before that, it was Landeskog and, Mika Rantanen they finally got in 2015. I mean, you look at the group that they've had to kind of build around. It took them, they had that little sugar burst, if you will, when Patrick Waugh was coach, and that lasted, a year?
Yeah.
And then they were out of the playoffs for 4 years before now kind of being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And look at how long it took for the Caps to win with that core. Look at how long it took for the Blues to win with that core. Look at how long it took for the LA Kings to win with that core. Look at how long it took for, the Pittsburgh Penguins to win 2 of their 3 Stanley Cups with Crosby and Malkin, right? I mean, these teams that have won, Tampa Bay Lightning, Stamkos, Kucherov, Hedman. I mean, you're talking about 08 and 09 for Stamkos and Hedman, right? And they finally win in 2020. Like, you're talking 12 years for Stamkos. And I mean, he wasn't even barely in the lineup for that. But Hedman, there's a guy who'd been in the league for 11 years, is arguably the best, if not one of the best defensemen in the league. Like, there's a cornerstone franchise game-changing defenseman that you had and for years and didn't and couldn't win, right? And you checked all these boxes. So veteran teams win. And I just don't think that this core was ready to go. But the fact is that there's nothing, like, there's COVID right now. There's nothing going on. All we have is hockey, and it's like, you're killing me with this team struggling right now. I think there's just the acceptance of a step backwards is unacceptable.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't add to the pressure that we're feeling all around, right?
You want something. You want some hope, and unfortunately, like, look, I mean, does that team want to win? I'm sure they do, but I think the reality is this team will probably take 2 steps back before taking another significant, stride or 2 forward, where, the infrastructure, where these veterans, like, once Beagle, once Roussel, once Sutter, once Eriksson, once Sven, once they're all off the books, that's when you'll see the cap flexibility. And, Pettersson will be another 2 years older. Hughes will be another 2 years older. I don't think there's nobody, like, the idea, I understand the conversation where people talk about, you've spoiled or you blew the ELC years of Pettersson and Hughes, but man, was that core around
Yeah.
them strong enough to win a cup? Like
Yeah.
Jacob Markstrom was an all-star last year, but man, do you trust Jacob Markstrom to go 4 rounds in a Stanley Cup playoff? Like after watching Jacob Markstrom for 6 years here,
And to keep up the pace that he was at, trying to dig us
guy broke
holes, like
down
dig us out of holes every
right?
time.
And like that's the thing to me. I find fascinating that if the Calgary Flames find a way to get into the playoffs, and you're playing every other night, like Jacob Markstrom already showed that he can't. Right? Like he's already hurt here in Calgary because he got overworked, right? What's going to happen when you rely on your number one goalie to play every other night in the Stanley Cup playoffs? Like you're going to have to say, oh, the best of 7, best of 7 series tied at 2 games apiece, and it's a back-to-back here for game 4 and 5. They're going with Big Save Dave tonight. Like,
Yeah.
you like your chances, Calgary? Like, probably not.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's been fun. It'll be a fun rest of the year to see how it plays out. Obviously, there's some big decisions that can or will be made.
So what do you do? What would you do if you're running the team?
Well, I don't know. I have a little too much empathy, I guess, but I personally, I'm not a huge fan. No.
Okay.
No, it's I mean, it's a great. I think everyone should endorse it and take more of it. But part of me sits here and says, you know what, this season's already kind of a wrap. Let's just let it play out and make those decisions afterwards. But the fan in me says this lineup looks deflated. We're not there day in, day out. Even the Winnipeg Jets game, like the first one where we won 4-0. I'm like, we got 3 goals on 5 shots. This is the team we know. We show up for about 10 minutes, if not 20, and then we coast for a little bit. And I'm like, where is the leadership? Where is this coming from? If it's not with the players, it needs to be with the coach or the coaches. And I'm just not seeing it anywhere. So I think a coaching change is what's needed, barring COVID and all these things that happen. I just think for the atmosphere of the team right now, a switch like that needs to be made.
I'm a Travis Green fan. Like I like Travis, and it's hard. I think the team still goes out and competes. I just think that they're insanely frail as a team.
Yeah.
And areas that helped them out in a big way last year have kind of let them down this year. Goaltending has been subpar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like goaltending just hasn't been good enough. And I think goaltending masked a lot of issues last year for the
100%.
Vancouver Canucks, right? And did we maybe exaggerate how good the blue line could be this particular season? Yeah, I think that's fair. Like the conversation and the suggestion that Pettersson and Hughes and the young guys will take another step forward improvement. I don't know if we saw that this year. Hughes puts up points still, but Quinn Hughes has not been the wonder kid this year that he was last year that this market and the NHL fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
I think Pettersson's the same way. And I think it is fair to ask, I was talking to a former NHLer recently who works for the league front office, and he suggested, I'm not sure if you can build a team around a guy that small. Right. So, and that's not a fan saying that. That's not a media hot take or anything along those lines. Like that's a player who's working in a front office suggesting that, saying, maybe, that's a big ask for a guy. When you look at franchise cornerstone players for teams, look at the strength of Sidney Crosby. May not be a 6'2" guy, but man, his core strength, and he is thick. Nathan McKinnon, thick. Connor McDavid, explosive. Austin Matthews, 6'3". You know what I mean? You look at these franchise players that are out there. Is Petey that guy? Look, I don't think Travis Green's the problem. I don't think the team has quit. I just think that the personnel is just not good enough around him. And, you've got really one line up front. You get 0 production from your bottom 6, which, it is what it is. And your back end, I'd make a case, but I could argue that Tyler Myers might be Vancouver's best defenseman this year. And that's probably not a recipe for success, right? Like if Tyler Myers is your best defenseman, I mean, it's great that he shows up to compete, but that's not a good sign. I think the leadership core, I think that's definitely worth asking, Austin. JT Miller, you wonder a personality like that with too augmented a voice, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it's just too acidic in the room. I think it's certainly valid. You look at what the Sabres are going through with a young team, and they kind of turn the keys over to the kids, and how Bo Horvat's handling all this as a captain. Is he the guy? He kind of falls in that long history of captains that are kind of the quiet, silent type, right? You look over the years, Daniel and Henrik were kind of those guys. Trevor Linden before that, Marcus Naslund was that guy, Stan Smeel, kind of keep your head down and, go about your business as opposed to that sort of fire and brimstone captain. Yeah. And
do you think that's just a culture thing that we seem to bring here? Like, just because to your point, you're pointing out our last handful of captains, all having that same kind of mentality. And we talked with Patrick Johnson last week, and he had a similar take with you about Travis Green, and the pieces around him, he has to use aren't that good. And at the end of the day, you can only put out what you can put out. And kind of, I was going to say, kind of to me, it reminded me of like Moneyball. Remember that conversation with Art Howe and Billy Beane, where Art Howe is like, you know what, I'm going to coach this team the way that I can explain in job interviews next fall. Like, I understand you want me to coach this team a certain way. I'm going to coach this team the way I know it'll be done. And for me, I see some of the decisions that Travis Green makes, and I just question, even with the players you have at your disposal, the way you implement them and the way you shuffle up some of the lineups. And I understand we need some sort of change, but there's some of these one or two little things that I do have questions about. So overall, we're lacking that leadership.
Oh, no, I think Travis Green, like how many times people keep suggesting like, spread the wealth with the lotto line, and why do you keep riding these guys out and they're getting their ass kicked? But if the lotto line doesn't score, nobody does, right? And you look at Petey seems to be successful when JT Miller's kind of the engine of that line. As much as people have hated on JT Miller this year, like that line kind of goes as JT Miller kind of takes them. So look at the other night where they lose that game to Winnipeg. Where does the offense come from? It comes from Petey, comes from Miller, and that's essentially it, right? Like you just don't get enough. Horvat scores in bunches, right? He comes, he goes, but like most of his goals, they all came in the first 5 games of the season, right? And then it's kind of fallen off, and that second line doesn't offer a lot. I mean, Niels Höglander is noticeable every night. You love his compete, you love his hustle, but man, like you're playing in a top 6, like at some point you got to finish, right? And it's not fair to sit there and say, rookie, you need to take this team another step, man. Let's go. I mean, that's not fair to kick him in the ass for it. He's just, it's just unfortunately, you're playing guys too high in situations. I look back, you go back 5-6 years ago, and when the Canucks were starting to erode with that 2011 core and they were starting to break up the band, you look at Chris Higgins was dynamite in that 2011 with that team as a fourth line guy with his speed and tenacity and his hustle. But here we were 4 years later, and Chris Higgins had been signed for that contract, I think at 2.5 per, but 4 years later, Chris Higgins is 4 years older, but he had been pushed up into the second line, right? And there's Jannik Hansen playing in your top 6 and Chris Higgins. And it's like, no, this team was a Stanley Cup contender because Jannik Hansen and Chris Higgins were in your bottom 6, right? And now you're like, you got no other options, so you're pushing these guys up. And that's kind of where the Canucks are now, where you've got that first wave of prospects that have finally come to light that you like. And I feel like the Canucks are waiting for that second wave to ripen. Now, Podkolzin's not that far away. I think there's a huge question mark whether Cole Lynn is that guy and whether Jack Rathbone is that guy. And I think the jury's still out of whether Olli Juolevi's a legit player and, Jalen Chatfield. But, you wait. I mean, you're talking 5 years since Olli Juolevi was drafted in the top 5, and you're waiting for this guy to be I mean, this
Well,
Mark, we've been patting this guy on the back for playing 12 minutes a night. It's like, he looked good out there for 12 minutes. Like, is that how low the bar is for this guy?
yeah, I understand that 100%. I've been on the Free Levy train for a while, so I think he's getting some credit where it's due, but 100% to your point, it's still a small sample size.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to touch on quickly, something you addressed earlier is, looking at some of these teams like the Avalanche, like Tampa Bay. Like, I'm a Tampa Bay part-time fan here, and I was sitting since 2015 saying, all right, this is our year. All right, this is our year. And of course, 5-6 years later, we finally get it. And it's about having that consistent battle back to it every year. So I think we're starting to see Brock Besser finally come to fruition after injured start, no real offseason. Obviously, this year's been condensed, but he's starting to show. We just maybe need to take, one or two more steps to get there, but it's really hard being this patient 100%.
Yeah, no, and that's, look, the window for this Canucks team, it might be 22, 23 before this team finally, takes a full stride forward, right? Perfect example, like you look at this offseason. So you lose Brandon Sutter, and I think a lot of people will be, hey, don't let the door hit you in the, on the way out. But Brandon Sutter's played well, I think, this year. He was great. I thought he was very good in the playoffs last year. You get Sven Berchi off the books as well. Tanner Pearson, I think, okay, that almost $4 million. I think he's probably not coming back next year. So you're going to get some cap relief here. Alex Edler's $6 million. Like, he's not, if he comes back and wants to finish as a Canuck, he's not coming back at $6 million, right? Like, it'll be maybe a third of that at this point. So you look at where things are kind of going. There is some help on the way, but you've got to find those replacements. And hopefully the Canucks in 2 off seasons from now will be in a position where they'll be enticing enough for veteran players that will look at the infrastructure that's here and say, I want to go for a cup with these guys. Yeah. Much like you're seeing with Toronto right now, right? You look at the Leafs and, we all kind of chuckled and look, man, the Leafs are screwed. They got to look at all the money that they're committing to Tavares and Matthews and Marner and Nylander, and in fairness, yeah, but like those star players you're going to ride with and you're going to roll with, and look at how they've kind of been creative. And yes, have they had to do some tiptoeing and cough up a first-round pick to make something go away? Yes, but at the same time, look at how they filled out the roster. Guys like Joe Thornton have wanted to come here, and Joe Thornton's he's been a fit, right? Jason Spezza, the guy, all he wanted to do was be a Leaf, right? And that guy is he the player he was 10 years ago? No, but he competes, man. Like he plays with some jam, like more jam than I ever remembered him in Ottawa, right? And to see how he can be, like, he cares. He's got a give-an-ish meter, and you want to see that. And guys like Zach Bogosian and that team suddenly became enticing for veteran players that want to win. And so hopefully the Canucks can put themselves in a position that, once you've got Pettersson and Hughes locked up, and if I could guess, I don't see those guys both signing similar contracts. I don't see those guys signing similar term. I think they're going to want to stagger those deals. And Demko, I think, is going to factor into that as well, right? The last thing that the Canucks want to deal with, again, is having all 3 contracts up at the same time, right? I think, you could see maybe Pettersson at 4 years and Hughes at 3 years and, Demko, whatever that falls in line with. But I don't think you want Petey and Hughes both up at the exact same time, unless you're locking them both in at 8-year contracts, right? Now they've kind of made the move with similar agents, but I think that's probably the play that you can hope for, where, look, once you finally get to summer 2022 and, whether we'll be allowed to have mass gatherings by then, we can all have a big gathering around Jackpool Plaza and the Olympic Flame, and we can all have a celebration and say goodbye and a proper send-off for a Viking funeral for Louis Eriksson's contract and, the Luongo recapture. There's $9 million of cap space, and we can bid adieu to Antoine Roussel and Jay Beagle. Like, look at all that money that is going to become available to the team. And, as long as you've got your young guys locked up, I think the telling thing is going to be you've got a window with 2 more years after this with Miller and Horvat's contract,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And those two guys at just over 5 million. I think your window is probably that 22, 23 that you got to be ready to go, no screwing around, and have your ducks in a row and take a run because, Horvat's going to probably get paid more.
Mm-hmm.
JT Miller is probably going to want to bump from what his contract's at. But I think next year is probably going to be another turbulent year for the Canucks, quite frankly, unless Demko takes another big step, unless Petey takes a big step, Hughes takes a big step. Unless that young core is ready to finally kind of really turn into rock stars right now, it could be choppy as you're waiting for the next wave of young guys to step forward. But that 22, 23, that's where I think the Canucks, it's going to be critical for that team to really be pushing the chips in and say, okay, here we go.
Yeah, time to be pot committed for sure. And the sights are on the horizon. At least we've got some hope in the future. That's the nice thing. I know you got to run pretty quick. I just wanted to ask you a couple questions because I don't know. My background's in marketing and social media, and I've been, lately I've been on Clubhouse. I'm not sure if you heard of the app, but I've been there talking with some people, and I was in a conversation with an NHL performance and mental coach, and she suggested that, I don't actually. I like to have my players on social media. I don't really enjoy them taking that because of the stress and all these things. But to me, I feel like the NHL is losing on major opportunities for marketing and branding through these little things. Not saying that every player's got to be involved. You got to know yourself. That's one thing. But I do feel that there's some room, some leeway for some improvement there. What are you seeing from, I guess, even too in the esports world and that whole marketing area? Is there things that you're, really enjoying or really exciting you, or maybe see room for improvement as well?
Well, I mean, social media it is such the future in esports, and I think sports wagering is a whole other element that I think probably in the next year or so it'll be legalized here in Canada, and the growth that just continues to happen. So I think that's going to be a major component in what the future of really sports media, I think, is going to be more and more gambling and odds and looking in terms of the trends going into each night. I think esports, obviously, I mean, I kind of chuckled years back how, my one buddy's son was just fixated on watching YouTube videos of people playing Minecraft going, man, like, why did you just play the game yourself? And now, I mean, look at Twitch, right? I mean, Twitch is just like through the roof. Staying away from social media. Look, man, social media is toxic at the best of times, right? And, and I think there are days every once in a while, and I say this as a middle-aged man, like sometimes I just take a walk away, and I've tried to make a point in the last, over the last probably 6 weeks or so on weekends, just to try to turn it off and get away from it because, it's fun, you check to see what's going on from a news standpoint, but I don't know, like sometimes you just want to turn it off. And especially I think in this market, you get the negativity from a Canucks standpoint. I will say this, like, I understand the logic of saying not wanting your athletes to engage on social media because mentally I think it can really screw with you. But I also look at the NBA and man, oh man, like they have like every week it's like a soap opera and the stars sell, but the guys talk shit on social media and they take issue with people calling them out, and there's a lot of drama, and man, guys take power rankings so seriously and like who's the best player in the league, and it's like, well, I can't believe you said he was better than me, and man, it's amazing, like it's like just beefs and drama, and man, to have that more in the NHL, I don't think players are quite wired that way in hockey, but man, it's like there's the benefit of how the NBA and just how I don't know if it's the players' mentality because stars are on the court for so long compared to a star hockey player is only on for 20 minutes a night, where an NBA player might be on for minus 7 minutes, right? Exactly. So I don't know if it's just they're wired differently that way, but The NBA seems to have made it work where the NHL's trying, right? I think everybody wants to see more personality, and I don't know what the ultimate recipe is, but I think we're starting to see players embrace the persona much more than we had in, where guys, everybody just fall in line, stay in your lane, and an outspoken guy was kind of a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a big Gary V guy, so that's part of my thing is I'm like, you only got so little time here in the limelight. You got to take advantage, and at the same time too, like you said, being able to have that awareness and realizing when it's negatively affecting you and when it's positive. Like myself, my personal social media I don't really use, but my hockey hour, my business side, all my other things, like that's where I'm in the game, and I love hacking, business dev and all these little things. But once again, that's me realizing where my balance is, and it's definitely tough when you're on the biggest stage in the world. So I can understand that.
When you have a big spotlight and you have a big platform, and it's tough though, right? Like you want that brand recognition, but at the same time, like you also have to be prepared for the backlash when the going gets tough, right? And that's where I always struggle when you've got those, Jim Benning right now, right? Like, when was the last time that Jim Benning spoke publicly? And it's like, be available when things are going great, but man, you cannot just disappear just because you're having a hard time. And that's one of those things I kind of take issue with Benning. And I think a lot of leaders, right? I'm a big believer of that movie, Remember the Titans, that line, attitude reflects leadership, right? And we talked about it at the outset with this team, the Canucks, right? Attitude reflects leadership right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a perfect way to sum it up and end it. James, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Hope to have you back soon.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you for listening to The Hockey Hour.